Welcome, 8th grade truth seekers, to today's Explainer. We're not just doing standard schoolwork today. Oh no, we're embarking on a high-stakes detective mission. Think about it. Whenever you get assigned a research paper, you're basically being asked to solve a mystery. You've got a question, and you literally need to track down the absolute truth. But in a world that's just full of rumors, half-truths, and straight-up fiction, how do you find the real story? Well, grab your magnifying glasses and your notepads, because we're opening up the investigator's playbook. Okay, let's dive into this. Setting out to find the truth isn't just about having good internet search skills, right? It requires a very specific mindset. It requires what Proverbs 15:14 calls a discerning heart. It says, "The discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly." So a discerning heart is one that absolutely demands real, rock-solid evidence. It doesn't just swallow whatever shiny rumor or random opinion happens to float by. It actively seeks out true knowledge. On the flip side, feeding on folly means you're just consuming foolishness, gossip, and fake news. As investigators, we definitely want to be the ones seeking out the genuine truth. So, here's our flight plan for today's mission. We'll start with a discerning heart, then cover why reliable sources matter, primary versus secondary sources, where to find truth, putting it into practice, and finally, wrap up with wisdom, choices, and peace. All right, Section 1, the discerning heart. Before you type a single word into a search engine, you've got to understand that a great investigator knows the exact difference between solid, undeniable facts and shiny, meaningless distractions. Imagine you're in the kitchen and you spend hours crafting this spectacular, towering, three-tier cake. I mean, the frosting is perfect, the decorations are stunning, it looks like a total masterpiece. But you baked the actual cake out of mud. What happens when someone takes a bite? Disaster, right? It's the exact same thing with your research. You could have the most beautiful handwriting, incredible vocabulary, perfect grammar, but if your paper is built on fake news, false facts, or incomplete info, your whole argument will completely collapse the second your teacher or reader takes a bite. Which brings us to Section 2, why reliable sources matter. That muddy cake brings us perfectly to the true foundation of any investigation. And it really is this simple. Weak sources equal weak research. Good research absolutely has to start with strong, reliable sources that give you accurate and relevant information. Think of reliable sources as the concrete blocks of your building. They provide the hard evidence you need to actually support your ideas. When you use strong sources, your work becomes credible. And that means your readers, whether it's your teacher, your classmates, whoever, will actually respect what you have to say. They'll listen to you because they know you've done the real work to find the truth. Moving on to Section 3, primary vs. secondary sources. Now, what's really interesting about this is that it's where we learn the difference between a rookie and a master investigator. Anytime you're gathering clues, you're going to run into the two major categories of evidence every good detective needs to know, primary and secondary. Think of it kind of like a crime scene. A primary source, that's the eyewitness who is standing right there on the corner when the bank was robbed. They saw it with their own eyes. A secondary source is the detective back at the precinct writing up a report based on what 5 different eyewitnesses told him. Both are incredibly useful, but they serve entirely different purposes, and you need to know when and how to use both. Let's break this down a bit further. A primary source gives you direct, first-hand evidence. These are original materials created right at the time an event happened, or by someone who is directly involved. Imagine reading a diary entry from a soldier in the trenches of World War II, detailing exactly what he ate and what he felt that morning. I mean, that is powerful, direct evidence. Or think of an audio recording of Martin Luther King Jr. delivering his speech. You're hearing the history exactly as it happened. Other examples would include original photographs, government documents, and direct interviews. On the other hand, a secondary source takes those original primary materials and interprets, explains, or analyzes them. So if the primary source is Martin Luther King Jr.'s actual speech, a secondary source would be a biography written about his life by a historian 30 years later. That author is looking back at speeches, diaries, and photographs to explain his life to you. Your history textbook summarizing the events of World War II? Classic secondary source. The authors didn't fight in the war themselves. They read the primary accounts to give you the big picture. And this brilliantly illustrates how the two work together. Let's say you're doing a research project on the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. You want a mixed use of sources. You look at dusty black and white photographs taken by people literally living through those massive sandstorms. That's your primary source. It gives you the emotional reality and visual proof. Then you watch a modern documentary that explains the poor farming practices that actually led to the disaster in the first place. That's your secondary source. It gives you the context and the analysis. put them together, and you build a totally airtight case. Next up, Section 4, Where to Find Truth. All right, detectives, we've identified our clue types. Now we need to know exactly where to hunt for this truth. When you're on the hunt, you want to stick to trusted, well-lit locations. This means heading to your local or school libraries. It means using academic databases that your school gives you access to. You want to look at reputable, established news organizations, dive into digital museum archives, and utilize official government documents. These are absolute gold mines for an investigator. The information housed in these places goes through a really rigorous checking process, which means you can actually trust that the facts you find there are directly connected and accurate for your research question. But I do have to issue a massive warning here. The internet has a lot of dark, shady alleys. You must be incredibly cautious about clicking on random websites or citing something you just happened to see in a social media post. Just because an influencer said it in a 60-second video does not make it a fact. Unless you can trace that information back to a reliable primary source or a verified secondary source, do not put it in your paper. Remember, don't bake your cake out of mud. Let's move to Section 5, Putting it into Practice. All right, let's see how this builds and tests those investigative muscles with a quick review. Question 1. How would you define a primary source, and can you give an example? Well, if you're thinking original, first-hand evidence, you hit the nail on the head. Things like a photograph, an interview, or a diary. Question 2. What about a secondary source? What's an example of that? Remember the detective back at the precinct. It's a source that analyzes or interprets primary sources. A great example from your own life is the science or history textbook sitting in your backpack right now, or maybe a documentary you just watched. Question 3. Explain why using only unreliable sources can harm your research. Think back to our kitchen disaster. If you use bad sources, your whole foundation crumbles. No matter how great your writing is, if the facts are wrong, your credibility is ruined and your reader just isn't going to trust you. Okay, question 4. List 3 places you can find reliable sources. We just talked about these. You've got libraries, academic databases, museum archives, government documents, and reputable news sites. Make sure you keep those in your investigative toolkit at all times. And finally, question 5. This is a bit of a trick question to test your instincts. Is a newspaper editorial written today about the American Revolution a primary or secondary source? Well, the American Revolution happened in the 1700s. Since the author writing today wasn't actually there to witness it, they're interpreting history, and that makes it a secondary source. Great job if you caught that one. And that brings us to Section 6, Wisdom, Choices, and Peace. As we wrap up our mission today, we really need to discuss the higher purpose behind all this learning. I mean, why do we even bother training our minds to seek the truth in the first place? Well, the crucial point is this powerful philosophy from the Academy Godly Learners series. Education without morality will hurt. Think about it. You could be the absolute smartest person in the room, capable of finding every primary source in the world. But if you don't have a strong moral compass, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Raw intelligence combined with bad choices ultimately leads to pain for yourself and for others. Knowing how to find the truth is the education part. Choosing to use that truth honestly and kindly, well, that's the morality part. And this is where true peace comes from. The book of Romans, specifically chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, tells us that keeping our minds focused on spiritual, moral truths brings life and peace. Being a godly learner means intertwining your really sharp investigative skills with a heart that genuinely wants to do what's right. It's about developing your character right alongside your intellect. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What good is all this education, all this smart research, if it doesn't lead to making good, wise choices in your life? Being a smart investigator is only half the battle. Becoming a wise, discerning human being who seeks truth and acts with integrity, now that is the ultimate victory. So as you head out on your next research mission, remember to build your cake on a solid foundation of truth and let that truth guide you toward peace. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And hey, happy hunting.